Estate planning is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and making the wrong decision about your estate can cost your beneficiaries and your heirs thousands, potentially tens of thousands of dollars, and months of agony. The problem with estate planning and talking about estate planning is exactly as I just mentioned. Everybody potentially is in a different scenario, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Someone with $500,000 likely is going to need a different solution than someone with $10 million. And so we try to do these events. A lot of, I'm a financial planner. A lot of people try to do these educational events, but even just doing a generic event is difficult because you don't know who's in your audience and what is actually going to be relevant to them. The reason being, again, someone who comes in, if you have $500,000, you probably just want to avoid probate and make sure your assets cleanly and quickly get to your beneficiaries. Pretty straightforward solution on what you have to do. Like I said, I'm not an attorney, but normally the answer is set up some sort of revocable trust, have your assets in there, you pass away, it avoids probate. The assets that are titled under the trust directly go exactly to your beneficiaries that the trust outlined. It's all pretty simple, right? Because probate, we don't like probate. Probate is the process of proving a will. What that does is that freezes all of your assets until the probate period is finished. Probate, on average, takes between 6 and 18 months to be completed. Now, while you're going through that also, you have to pay attorney's fees. You're going to have to pay an assessor to assess real estate and any other property that's illiquid. For most people who have, I'd say people who have under 5 or 6 million, I'd say that's usually the concerns and the worries they have when it comes to estate planning. It's, I want to avoid probate. How can we get this quickly to my beneficiaries when I pass away with minimal damage? Now, why do I say that number? Well, the estate and gift tax combined exclusion is $15 million. So assuming you gave 0 taxable gifts throughout your life, if you have less than $15 million, you're not paying any estate tax. So people who are much below that, we don't necessarily really have to worry about planning for the estate. However, once you start to get above that $5 or $6 million threshold, especially if you're younger, that's when this becomes a real concern. And that's when this is almost more important than just the simple probate planning process. We still want to avoid probate, but all of a sudden there become other concerns. For example, the reason we say 5 or 6 million is if, let's say you're 60 years old, let's say you have those assets invested and you're going to live another 20 years. Well, it would not be crazy to assume then by the time you pass away, those assets will have grown and you will be above that 15 million, adjusted for inflation, of course, threshold. So if someone came to me and was 50 years old and said, I have $6 million, well then, yeah, we would start planning now for 30 years down the road, because we don't want those to all of a sudden grow to a point where, oh, now we're above the threshold and we didn't plan for this, because it would make sense, barring a untimely death, that those will eventually grow to become a problem for estate tax purposes. Another issue on that front is if you're in that situation and you have a spouse that is not a U.S. citizen. Well, now you have a spouse that is not a U.S. citizen, you're going to need a special type of trust because there is no marital deduction. Now, Tyler, what is a marital deduction? What are you talking about? Well, let's say I'm married to my wife Susie, right? And let's say I have 10 million in my name, 20 million in my name. She's got 5 million in her name. If I pass away, and Susie's a U.S. citizen, if I pass away, does my estate pay any estate tax on that? Even though I'm above the threshold? No. Why? Because there is something called the marital deduction, which is unlimited, that if I'm married, it's always the second spouse to die that pays the estate tax, essentially. So I have 20 million, I pass away, 20 million goes to Susie, there's no estate tax. If I have, let's go into a little bit more advanced version of this. So remember, the estate level exemption is 15 million. Let's say I have 10 million, it's below that 15 million, I pass away, 10 million goes to her. Well, there wouldn't be any estate tax anyway, right, Tyler? You're correct, but there is something called portability, where the remaining 5 million of my exemption that I would have had becomes portable and is given to Susie. So now Susie's exemption is not 15 million, that goes up to 20, because whatever my unused amount is goes over to my spouse at the time, assuming I was married at the time. However, what if Susie is not a citizen of the United States? Well, if Susie is not a citizen of the United States, that does not qualify for her. It doesn't apply. Actually, there's no marital deduction at all for her. So if I all of a sudden have $20 million, Susie's not a citizen, my estate pays taxes, pays the estate tax on the $5 million that's above the threshold. It's going to be a sizable chunk of change, even though I'm married. So, and this is a kind of a long-winded way to get to my point. So in that situation, the usual scenario would be to set up a QDOT trust. Now, what is it just stands for a qualified domestic trust. She's good, she'll be able to draw off the interest of that trust. Why does this happen? The United States wants to make sure that the money's not leaving the country and that they're not giving, the reason you don't get the marital deduction is because what if they give me that deduction? My 20 million fully goes to Susie, no estate tax regularly, we're talking outside of the trust, and then she leaves the country. Well, now they never got to charge an estate tax on that, and the money's gone. Whereas in the qualified domestic trust, she's going to get to pull off the income for that, but not necessarily the principal. And then when she passes away, it'll go to beneficiaries, and then the idea is those beneficiaries that you would have already set, the primary person would have already set, will eventually then pay taxes on the money down the road. So that's one example though, is, and that again only really makes sense if you're going to get above that $15 million level. If again you have 500,000, a million, 2 million, you're probably not going to have to worry about that because you're below the estate tax level anyway. But again, that's just one concern. Now the other is, even if you're married, both spouses are U.S. citizens, well, eventually, if you don't do anything, and let's say go back to the example, let's say I have 20 million, my wife has 5, this time we're both U.S. citizens. Well, if we don't do anything, if we don't get any of it out of the estate, eventually someone's going to pay the estate tax. Because let's say I die first, she gets my 20, well now she's got 25. If she dies 2 years later, well now she's got 25 million, that's 10 over the threshold, that's going to be taxed. So, which is why what we would look to do is somehow remove money from the estate, usually through some form of irrevocable trust, but also figure out what you actually want. Because oftentimes it's similar to what we just mentioned. It's, I want my kids to get most of this money, but I want to make sure my wife Jane, my second wife Jane will say, I want to make sure my second wife Jane has income to live on for the rest of her life. And then so in that case, we'd look at, a bypass trust or something of the sort, so that we can have all that set out, so that there's someone getting income, the money's passing to my kids, and that's all set up really, really good. So the reason I say all of this, and there's a whole bunch more I could go into, is when you talk about estate planning, it really goes into two camps. Is this person feasibly going to ever be eligible to pay estate taxes? If the answer is no, okay, it's a pretty straightforward process. You could just title your beneficiaries on all your accounts, and for a lot of people, that's good enough. If you have beneficiaries on your IRAs, on your brokerage accounts, on your bank accounts, it goes right to your beneficiaries anyway. There's no need for a trust. Sometimes, a lot of the time it's, I have 4 houses. Okay, let's put those in trust name. but that's more so to avoid probate and the fees that come with that. Whereas the second camp is, I need to avoid the estate tax. I need to be able to provide so that my kids can get some of this income while also providing, or my kids can get some of these assets while also providing income for my spouse. Or I'm going to be above this estate limit. My wife's not a U.S. citizen. We got to make sure, we got to do something about this. So we got a bunch of videos on these topics. Just wanted to really go into this just because it's a question I get a lot. And sometimes, we'll do sometimes estate planning seminars, estate planning sections, and it can get really drawn out because we could have a room where 90% is in one camp versus the other. And so, all right, it doesn't make sense to give equal time to both when 90% or even 100% only fall in the one camp. So if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. What we've also done is we've got a link in the description. If you're interested in asking some more questions about this, want to get your situation looked at, click the link. We schedule complimentary Zoom calls just to really discuss your situation, see if there's a way we can help you out. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Have a great rest of your day.